you all for being here today. So today's guest for this presentation is our board president, Peggy Sinko. She'll be talking about her collection of souvenir spoons, most of which are local to Oak Park scenes, but she's got some other things to illustrate what a fascinating hobby and creations these are. So with that, I will pass this presentation over to Peggy Sinko.
Thank you, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted this morning to share with you some information on souvenir spoons. And I want to start by making it clear that I am no expert on spoon collecting. This is something I kind of stumbled into. I've learned a little bit about spoon collecting. I will try my best to answer your questions, but there's things about this that I really don't know the answer to. Move to our first slide here. Now, we are all familiar with this type of souvenir spoon, these miniature spoons. They're found in every museum gift store, well, not in ours, but at zoos, historic sites, parks. They exist for, here we see one from the state of Indiana, for states, for countries. And they're a very nice, inexpensive reminder of a visit or an experience. They're obviously meant to be displayed, not used, but this is not the kind of spoon that I'm going to be talking about today. I don't know if there are any of this style for Oak Park. I've never seen one. I'd be interested in one if there is, but today, rather, we're talking about souvenir spoons that were popular in the first 2 to 3 decades of the 1900s. These are sterling silver spoons, and today we're focusing on Oak Park. So they would either have the name of the town, and here we see an example from Oak Park, Illinois, or an image of a building. In some cases, they're engraved. In other cases, they're embossed, the image or the script in the bowl of the spoon. Now, I really don't remember where I saw my first Oak Park spoon, probably in an antique store. And I thought, well, this is kind of, they're very attractive, they're curious. But to date, I have collected 13 different Oak Park souvenir spoons from this roughly 25 to 30 year period. I know of at least 2 that I don't have. One is in the museum collection. And eventually my collection will also go to the museum. Now, I think I can date my interest in spoons to the early 1960s, when my sister Susan and I sent in our Rice Krispies box top and 50 cents for our Huckleberry Hound and Yogi Bear spoons. And these are not these cheap plastic things you get today. This is genuine silver plate. And these kind of spoons are also an interesting sort of category within spoon collecting of advertising and novelty spoons. But we're not really going to talk about these today, except to show you, here are the actual spoons. Yes, we still both have them. Susan has Huckleberry Hound. I have Yogi Bear. I use Yogi Bear to eat my breakfast cereal every morning. And so they're just a great reminder from those early days, and I suppose my interest in spoons. Now, we want to look at the question of where do these souvenir spoons, where does the origin of this come? And generally, spoon collectors seem to be in agreement. And we're talking about a spoon that is specifically designed to commemorate a place or an event. And it's generally acknowledged that this dates from the early 1890s in the United States. And the first acknowledged souvenir spoon are these Salem witch spoons. Now, I find that a rather odd event to, I'm not sure you celebrate it, commemorate it, but they were developed and sold by a jeweler in Salem, Massachusetts. They proved to be incredibly popular. In the picture you see at right, the first spoon is the one that is horizontal, and then later, shortly after, he came out with this one that is much more elaborate. And in fact, they are so popular that you can still today buy a reproduction of the second spoon at the Salem Witch Museum. Now, none of us will be surprised to learn that souvenir spoons, then beginning in the 1890s, really catch on for events that attract a lot of people. Things like the World's Columbian Exposition, the 1893 World's Fair here in Chicago, the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, lots of souvenir spoons from those events, and also for places that would attract a lot of tourists. Niagara Falls, Mount Vernon, the Gettysburg Battlefield, but little old Oak Park with its over 1 dozen different spoons. What do we make of that? Oak Park in 1910 had a population of just under 20,000. And I think we could all agree that it was hardly a tourist destination in the early 1900s. But these sterling silver souvenir spoons became a huge and very, very popular across cities and towns, large and small, all across the United States. And chances are very good that if you go looking for a souvenir spoon from your hometown, you will find one. Now, perhaps it'll simply say Peoria, Illinois in the bowl of the spoon, or you might find an image of the post office in Kokomo, Indiana, the high school in Rapid City, South Dakota, or the state prison in Waupun, Wisconsin. They are out there. And yes, indeed, there is a souvenir spoon with the state prison in Waupun, Wisconsin. In fact, there are a number of souvenir spoons of prisons. It seem to be a popular object to reproduce. People were proud of their towns and what they viewed as their special attractions. Now, we may find that a little unusual today, but I think back to one of my favorite musicals, The Music Man. And I feel sure that the people of River City would have had at least one souvenir spoon. Now, it's said that Meredith Willson based River City on his own hometown of Mason City, Iowa. And yes, there are Mason City, Iowa souvenir spoons. Now I'm going to divide the Oak Park spoons, these 13, well, and we'll count 14, into two broad categories. So we're going to look first at the spoons that have Oak Park engraved in the bowl of the spoon. 5 of my 13 spoons are of this style. Now, engraving is a process where the lettering or the picture is actually etched into the bowl. You'll notice at the top, the 3 spoons at the top are all the same silver pattern. They're all from the same company, and they all say Oak Park, Illinois. And yet they're all different. And I can't really account for this. I don't know if this was one order and there were different engravers kind of doing their own thing on them. Were they different orders? And so the engraving varies at different times. But in any case, we can see very different styles that show off the talent and of the craftsmen who did this kind of work. This is the one spoon that I have not identified the pattern. I'm not, if there's any gardeners out there, they may be able to tell me what that flower is. The other floral patterns I've identified. So how were these produced and sold? These were not cheap souvenirs like the spoon that I showed you at the beginning. They may have cost as much as $3 or even more. And souvenir spoons were manufactured by numerous silver companies during this year, even including places like Tiffany's. Needless to say, we don't have any Oak Park souvenir spoons done by Tiffany's, but most of them were produced by a handful of companies that established special departments that were specifically targeting this market. And two of them dominated the business. The Mechanics Sterling Company, which was a subsidiary of Watson and Newell in Massachusetts, and the top three spoons are all from Mechanics Sterling. And also our Wallace and Sons in Connecticut, which the lower spoon is from. And of the 13 spoons in my collection, only one was produced by a firm other than these two. Now, to give you some example of the reach of these companies, here's two examples that I just sort of serendipitously happened to have. This is floral series number 7, the Wild Rose pattern produced by Watson and Newell. I really like these. I like these cutout ones. I think they're very attractive. And you'll see that one is engraved from Oak Park, and the other one is from Hammond, Indiana, my hometown. And I just happen to have both of these. And there are certainly dozens of other examples that we could find across the country of this same Wild Rose pattern from different cities and towns. Now, souvenir spoons were generally sold by a local jewelry store or some more upscale business. It wasn't the kind of thing you bought at the 5 and dime. And here we see an ad from the Oak Leaves in 1916 for Otto Leuven, a jeweler and optometrist who had his store on Marion Street. And he's advertising a souvenir spoon that has a picture of Oak Park and River Forest High School in the bowl. Now, one could order a custom-made handle, but generally the buyer, in most cases a jeweler, would select an existing silver pattern from a catalog. And they had lots and lots of interesting choices. We see here, and it's a little hard to show because this is reproduced. This is a page from the Watson and Newell, one of the Watson and Newell catalogs. And you see it's called Souvenirs from the South. And most of the spoons and virtually all the Oak Park spoons are kind of standard floral patterns. But here you can see that one could get, we see at the upper right, you could get a cactus, you could get peanuts, you could get various palm trees and other sort of tropical items. And I just will draw your attention, it's a little hard to see, to the spoons that are arrayed on the bottom. And it's the one that's the third from the right. And this is a pattern number 439-1, which is called Oranges and Blossoms. And just hold on to that because we're going to see that again later. The retailer, the jeweler, would select the pattern they wanted, and then you purchase the spoons by the dozen. So you would place an order for 1 dozen, 2 dozen, how many ever. And at the bottom, if you were able to see this clearly, we could see that the price for a dozen of the oranges and blossoms spoon would be $9 a dozen. Now, it appears that in most cases, the engraving or embossing work was actually done at the factory, particularly the engraving. It really took skilled craftsmen to do this. And certainly a local jeweler could engrave an initial or a date on a piece of silver, but these really required a lot more skill. And when we see the images of buildings, they're really quite accurate, whether they're engraved or embossed. And so we know that the craftsmen were working from photographs to make them very authentic. Now, Oak Park doesn't have any natural features like mountains or waterfalls, which you can find on souvenir spoons. So the remainder of the spoons in my collection are images of buildings. And the most commonly depicted building on souvenir spoons is, and this is across the country, it's not surprisingly, it's the local school, especially the high school. And this is really not surprising for a couple reasons. Number one, in the early 1900s, this was the heyday of towns establishing and building high schools. And they were often impressive 2 or 3 story brick edifices. They spoke to the progress and the sort of progressive nature of the community. People were proud of these buildings. And secondly, as we saw from this ad for Otto Leuven Jewelers, these spoons made great high school graduation gifts. And I have 2 examples in my collection here. The top spoon, which is a really lovely engraved, and again, this is engraved, the image is actually etched into the bowl. This is the original high school building, which you see in this Philander Barclay photo, which it was erected in 1891. It stood at the southwest corner of Lake Street and East Avenue. This spoon's a great example of the graduation gift spoon, because on the back is engraved the initials FN and the date 6/14/06. June 14, 1906 was the date of the Oak Park High School commencement. There was only one person in the graduating class with the initials FN. And so we know for certain that this very spoon was likely a graduation gift given to Florence Norton. Florence lived with her parents, Horatio and Jessie, and her siblings at a house that still stands at what is now 401 Forest Avenue in Oak Park. Now, Forest Avenue, for those Oak Parkers and people who are familiar with the area, that's the block immediately south of Chicago Avenue. So it's the block where the Frank Lloyd Wright home and studio is. And if you're familiar with some of the Frank Lloyd Wright homes on this block, you can see this home, 401, which is immediately to the north of the Nathan Moore home. It is a lovely grand Queen Anne Victorian that still stands. Florence's father ran a tin manufacturing company in Maywood that eventually becomes American Can. She later married and lived in California. The second spoon shows the new high school building with the Ontario Street entrance. So we know that it dates from after 1907. This is an embossed image. This involved a designer who would design the pattern from a photograph, and you can see it's really quite accurate. And then a tool and die maker would translate that to the steel block or the die that was then used to stamp the spoon bowl. So it creates an image that is actually raised rather than etched into the surface. The advantage of the die method is that it can be used, once you create the die, it can be used over and over again. And there is one other souvenir spoon one in my collection of the high school, which is exactly this exact same image. So it's done from the same die. It's the same silver company, but it's a different spoon pattern. And it also appears that the ad that we saw earlier for Otto Leuven Jewelers, it looks to be that same image that created from that same die in the spoon that he was advertising. Now, what other buildings would we like to commemorate? Well, we're very proud of our libraries, and so libraries are very popular. Not surprising that I have two spoons that show the Scoville Institute that you see here in the picture. This was Oak Park's first library. It's on the site of our current library. You know, in Oak Park, we build a library, we tear it down, we build a library, we tear it down, we build a library, all on the same site. The Scoville Institute was erected in 1888, and we have two engraved images. They're similar, but they're certainly not identical because they're done by individuals of the Scoville Institute. The spoons are both from Mechanics Sterling. Both the patterns were introduced in 1903, so don't know exactly when these spoons date for them, but not before that. One is Tea Rose and one is Orchid. What other buildings would warrant having a souvenir spoon? Well, the Oak Park Village Hall. And I have currently 3 different spoons that depict the Oak Park Village Hall, or the municipal building as it was known. This was located at the southeast corner of Lake Street and Euclid. It's where the Oak Park City Apartments complex now stands. The 1903 cornerstone of the building still remains right on the corner there. You see it. It's a reminder, a relic feature of the past history of the site. When Oak Park became an independent village in 1902, one of the first actions that they needed was to find a site for and build a village hall to consolidate all the departments that were needed for this newly organized village. Local architect E.E. Roberts designed the building, and it served the community until the new village hall was built on Madison Street. This building was finally demolished in 1986, and we see both embossed and engraved images. And one of these, and I believe it's the lower one, is the only example that I have of a spoon by a company other than the two of them, and it is from Baker and Manchester Company of Providence, Rhode Island. Finally, we can go to the one spoon that actually depicts a building that is still standing in Oak Park, and that is the old YMCA building, not the YMCA building that we know today, but the original Oak Park YMCA building. I suppose we can say the ones showing the high school, I suppose there's some bits or pieces of that that actually still exist, but we don't see that Ontario Street entrance. The YMCA building was also designed by E.E. Roberts. It opened in 1904. This building sits on Oak Park Avenue, directly across from Scoville Park. Right to the north of it is the large Oak Park Club condominium building, which dates from the 1920s. And to the south are the L-shaped row of shops. This building had an indoor pool, a gymnasium. Later, it housed the Emmaus Bible School. It's now a condominium building. And you can see the columns shown both on the spoon and that are still evident there on that. Earlier, I drew your attention to the spoon pattern oranges and blossoms. And this is the spoon that actually has that as its pattern. When I think Oak Park, I don't think orange groves, but it is a lovely image. It is rather curious why this pattern was chosen. And I suppose in some ways it's more attractive than some of the other offerings we saw. At least it's not peanuts, palm trees, or even alligators. And yes, you could get alligators. And so that winds up my presentation. I will mention, just to anticipate one question, what about river forest? I'm not dissing you. I'm not dissing river forest. I look for river forest spoons. I have alerts set up for them. I have never seen one, heard about one. I'm not prepared to categorically say there's not any, but I have yet to see one. So with that, I'm happy to, if anyone has any questions. Rachel tells me, well, Lisa told me, we are going to have these spoons on display at the museum. And so you can come in and see them and a few more odds and ends. And
And I sort of threw this at you too, but if you want to,
can
I don't know
just
if you can
hold this
sort of
up?
see the orange blossoms, but we've got
That's orange blossoms.
that example. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, but I will say a comment, if you can sort of hear me off to the side, that I was really fascinated yesterday learning that jeweler / optometrist was sort of a thing. We all know about like the barber / surgeon combination from the turn of the century, but I guess if that was also a common practice to be both optometrist and jeweler, that's fun.
I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, if you want to switch places with me again. Then
I will once again just invite you all to ask any questions. We have a couple more minutes left on the call. And I want to take this opportunity to remind everybody to check our website for upcoming programs, because we have we're still working on our schedule for virtual programs for the rest of 2021. And because of the holidays, some of those might be on different days. So we are working on finalizing that schedule and hope that you will check our website or watch for our email blasts and everything like that to get those days. And we'll also be having a program on December 7th, and this is sort of the first announcement of it, because we're working on the presentation still, but we're going to be talking about food history. So we'll have a program here at the museum on the evening of December 7th, that's a Tuesday, and we're going to be featuring Emily Pastor, who's a local food blogger and cookbook author, and she'll be talking about mostly like food technology, some of the things that we have in our kitchens that we take for granted, but how they got started and how they've changed the way that we cook over time. So we have a comment in the comments, and this is for Peggy. You use Yogi Bear for your daily cereal. Is there a sense that these souvenirs were used as eating utensils or strictly meant for display?
That's a good question. They certainly could be used for eating utensils, and I suspect that people may have used them like, you know, you had your friends over for the card game, and so you might use the spoons when you serve tea or something like that. So they certainly could be used. They're actual, you know, standard teaspoon size, or some of them just a little bit smaller. And I do suspect that people use them maybe in a sort of a party situation or something like that, as well as just having them displayed.
That's funny.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your question. And if it looks like nobody else has any at the moment, then I'll invite you also to use the email that you see on the screen to contact me afterwards. I'm happy to have Peggy answer any of your specific questions or see if you have other comments, other ideas for programs in the future that you'd like to see. Please let us know. And with that, I think I will sign off for today. So thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you again on the next program.